Sasquatch, Bigfoot, wood ape. A cryptid that's been one of the most famous out there and has been pretty much well known since the 70s throughout media, TV, photographs, journals. The question still remains, why are there so many goddamn Bigfoot movies? Today I'll be looking at a selection of some of the most terrible Bigfoot movies I have found on the internet and on streaming services, because for some reason streaming services seem to have a fuck ton of these movies. Now, why Bigfoot? I mean, I don't know. I guess something about seeing a giant ape run around and either attack people or kill people has some kind of, love in the human imagination. We could probably put this down to the fact that overall Bigfoot is pretty much just a giant monkey with more intelligence than an ape. So it's kind of that thing of like, he's not a giant ape, but he's not a person killing people. That kind of weird in between maybe gives people in the horror genre this idea of something creepy that you feel like you could maybe reason with, but it's too far removed for you to be able to. I don't know. Either way, all I know is I've got a shit ton of terrible movies of Bigfoot that I have watched for this video, with me highlighting 4 of the ones I've seen, as I feel like these ones are probably the best of the bunch. Well, I say the best, the most interesting more so. Now, when it comes to Bigfoot films, most famously, we had the film Legend of Boggy Creek from the 70s, but that movie's well liked, and honestly, the movie itself isn't too bad. Maybe I'll do another video on that and its weird sequels, but overall, it's a pretty well liked movie. In terms of other Bigfoot media, I guess the only other big movie you'd have is Harry and the Hendersons, which is a fun family comedy movie. It doesn't really fit in the genre. So I think, while I mention those, we'll move straight on to the first movie of the bunch. Willow Creek, a 2013 found footage horror movie directed by Bobcat Goldthwait. It pretty much tells the story of a group of campers who are sort of Bigfoot experts, as you will, who go around the area where he's been mostly seen, interviewing people in the local area before going on a search for him in the woods. The best way I can describe this movie is pretty much just Blair Witch, but instead of them searching the woods for a witch and seeing kind of cool mystical remnants, they're looking for Bigfoot. And the most you kind of get out of that is just seeing them see footprints on the ground and occasionally hearing weird noise in the distance. But they are in the woods, so not really that weird. Honestly, the first 20 minutes of the movie is somehow, I guess, the most interesting, but it's still pretty bland. Pretty much all we get during this first 20 minutes of the movie is the crew interviewing random people in the area. So you got people that like own a Bigfoot gift shop, mountain rangers of the area, just people who generally sort of live next to the woods talking about whether they've seen Bigfoot or not. And honestly, while it's not exactly enthralling, it at least is something and at least feels kind of real. Kind of similar again to the first 10 or so minutes of Blair Witch, where they're interviewing the local townspeople. But then the movie just kind of nosedives from there as we get to the actual looking for Bigfoot section of the movie, which I can best describe as 2 numpties who are meant to be experts running through the woods, screaming and freaking out, trying to find Bigfoot, but with no real goal or real direction of where they're looking. Just, hey, here's 200 acres of open woods. Let me see if I can find Bigfoot in here. And it goes about as well as you'd expect, of pretty much not finding anything until it gets them. And honestly, I feel like most of this is just scenes of them walking about, hearing noises, or finding the smallest animal track and freaking out because they think they've found Bigfoot. Again, this is a similar problem I have with Blair Witch, but I feel like at least with that movie, I can understand why people like it, and at least with that, it's the first. I feel the biggest problem with a lot of found footage movies, especially in the sort of current era, and a lot of these more lower budget ones, and this is a knock on low budget filmmaking, there have been a lot of good low budget found footage movies, but I feel like the problem is that a lot of them take this kind of idea of just walking into the woods or walking into an area and running around screaming for about 20 minutes or freaking out, and then at the end of the movie you'll see a glimpse of the monster for about 5 minutes, and yeah, that will be pretty much the horror of the situation. And I get the fear of the unknown is a thing, but when there is not even any link to some kind of monster or any clues, and all we're left with is, there's bloods in the woods, there's footprints in the woods. Yeah, it's the woods, it's probably just a hunter, or an animal, like, I don't know. I mean, at least with Blair Witch, you saw clues and stuff, but I feel with this movie, it's just really nothing but 40 to sort of minutes to an hour of people walking through the woods. The highlight of this movie, though, I'd have to say, is when they sort of go to finally settle down for the night. Obviously, the night falls down, it gets dark, they've got to hide inside of somewhere, otherwise death is pretty much coming for them. At least that's how they see it, even though so far we've seen nothing of any kind of worry so far. So they decide to get into their tent and snuggle up for the night, but then they get woken up at about 1 in the morning to hear something slamming against a tree and making weird animal noises. This truly terrifies the two of them, but honestly it's pretty horrendous and pretty hilarious to the audience, because if you're watching as the audience, you can just hear what sounds like someone's making thud noises and then making monkey screams, which honestly, I get why that would be scary to them, but as an audience, it just sounds hilarious. Not to mention, they freak out like he's right next to them, but you can clearly hear that the sound is super far away. And again, doesn't seem like it has anything to do with them. I mean, I get the idea of being scared. If I saw a bear like 300 yards away smacking a tree, I wouldn't really be too freaked out because it's clearly not interested in me. But whatever, the couple freak out, and then when they do go outside and check, who would have believed Bigfoot is gone? The couple then pretty much decide to wake up the next morning and decide, fuck this shit, I'm out, and leave. The only problem with this is, in trying to find the path back to civilization, they keep walking around a circle, in which we get the most fun scene I've ever seen in a movie, with about 10 minutes of this couple constantly arguing with each other whether they're going in a circle or not, seeing the same tree again, and then arguing and screaming. And you just feel like a kid watching someone's parents argue. And overall, it's just not fun. It's not interesting. These characters are not deep, so I'm not gleaming anything from this. And after about 10 more minutes of this, they finally come up to, I assume, Bigfoot. Well, we presume it's Bigfoot because all we see is like a glimpse of what looks like a leg and a face, but the face kind of looks like a pig, so God knows if it's Bigfoot or someone going full pigsy like Manhunt. And then we hear screams and random noises and the movie's just over. So I guess they're dead, we assume. Not really any information to the contrary or to the positive. They're just not there anymore. All in all, I'd say this is just a pretty boring movie. Like, it's not offensive in any way. It's not doing anything terrible. It's not making any horrible statements or, just flat out displaying bad stuff on screen, but it's the worst kind of movie. It's boring, it's dull, and honestly, it's one of those films where afterwards, you're either going to immediately forget it or just wish you had your time back, because nothing happens. Instead of having a kind of movie where maybe it's bad, but at least I can enjoy it, I'm spending the whole time just watching a film where all I remember about the movie was, oh yeah, that was the one where people walked around the woods for 20 minutes and then died. It wasn't fun to watch. It wasn't fun really even to talk about right for this review. Overall, yeah, I would not understand the hype this movie had. Because honestly, I remember when this movie sort of first came out, I was looking at sort of the movie groups I'm in, and when people were recommending found footage movies, there was the typical ones that I did like Roy the Curse, Wreck, other sort of good movies like that. And then in between them was this recommended, Willow Creek. And again, the whole reason I'm doing this video, something about the idea of Sasquatch is pretty fun and funny to me. I mean, the idea of a giant ape man is pretty ridiculous. But at the same time, I thought, well, if you try and do it scary, you can make a fun horror movie at the least. This was not that. This was boring. Not in any way interesting, honestly. I mean, if you really want to watch it, go for it. But it's not like a fun, bad movie. And it's not even really got any redeeming qualities. Overall, dull. On to the next one. So this is a pretty famous movie. Well, I guess pretty famous if you live in the UK. As this is one of the movies that was banned as part of the video nasties epidemic. If you don't know what that is, essentially, the UK had a weird censorship brawl throughout the 80s where it was pretty scared of violent horror movies being on VHS because they thought the fact that you could watch it over and over again on VHS would corrupt our youth and turn them all into sadistic killers. And so they created pretty much a list of every movie that was filled with horrible content that they did not want in England. And pretty much any movie that was on that list, either the producers of the movie and distributors had to cut the film if they wanted it in the UK, or just straight up the movie would not be allowed on VHS. I mean, honestly, obviously, this is a very condensed version of that. Even me right now, listening to what I'm saying, I probably didn't describe it in the best way. There are two great documentaries on it called Video Nasty's The Definitive Guide, Volume 1 and 2. I'd give them a watch. They really explain this better. But anyway, that's the little bit of history. So that's pretty much going in. The only thing I could say about Night of the Demon, it's mostly just remembered as the one weird Sasquatch movie that is extremely violent, I guess, is the caveat there. I'd put the quotation marks on that one, because while the movie does have some randomly really violent scenes, most of the movie is extremely boring. This is kind of a problem with the video nasties in general. If you're someone that tries to go through all of them, there are some good movies in there that have disturbing content. There are just some good movies in general in there. And then there are a lot of movies in there that have one really graphic scene, or one scene that was pretty graphic at the time, and then the rest of the movie is extremely dull. And sadly, Night the Demon falls into this category. While the concept of a gory Bigfoot horror movie appealed to me when I first heard about this film back in the sort of late 2000s, when looking at horror movies on the internet. It's not a good movie. I really cannot recommend this one a lot. Let's just jump into the description. The movie starts like all good horror films do, with someone recounting the story from the hospital bed that he's in after facing the attack of Sasquatch. So yeah, our main character is in bed, exclaiming to the doctors and to a police officer what happened to him. Funnily though, a weird theme throughout this movie, and just sort of overall the whole film, is that most of the time, even though he's recounting the story, he starts recounting stories within stories. I mean, literally as he starts recounting what happens to him, he literally mentions the fact that the whole reason he went to Bigfoot Town was that he heard a story about some guy getting his arm ripped off. So I feel like most of this movie and most of these death scenes are, weirdly enough, not the character recounting what he saw, but something that he was told by somebody else about what they saw, or even didn't see, or just a guest from the aftermath of the crime. So it's kind of weird that pretty much the actual main plot of the movie is not only a flashback, but that's not even the interesting part. It's the flashbacks within flashback, just getting some like Naruto tier shit. And honestly, that's how I can best describe this movie. Most of this movie is boring monologues about the nature of Bigfoot. Pretty much either him in the hospital bed briefly talking about it, him talking to his students about Bigfoot, or him talking to locals about Bigfoot. I mean, I guess I'll set up the general gist of the movie. After he freaking is in the hospital, the main character sort of recounts the story of how he and a group of his students decided to go out and visit these woods where apparently loads of murders had been happening, where we have some footage that you can barely see of somebody dying, and obviously the story of a fisherman getting his arm ripped off and yeeted by Bigfoot. Obviously they don't know it's Bigfoot, but that's the whole thing with this movie. They go there because they hear that there's stories about Bigfoot killing people and decide to investigate it. So what the movie basically turns into is this boring group of, I'm assuming 20-something college students and their professor, walking around the woods, randomly meeting people that live in the area as they recount a story of how somebody died there, or the guy who's the professor telling them about somebody that died there. It's just a very weirdly narrated movie. But honestly, I think overall the biggest problem with this movie is just the plot isn't important. The plot is the worst part of the film. If you want to watch this movie for the plot, you're really missing out on what the movie is best at. I mean, this is what I'd like to describe as a scenes movie. As I was describing before, a lot of those video nasties, a lot of them have some great scenes in it, but the rest of the movie is garbage. And I'd say the exact same thing with Night of the Demon. If you're watching this movie purely from A to B with the plot, you are going to get extremely bored very quickly, because the main plot of the movie is very dull. Most of it is talking over terrible score and just general people just sort of sitting around and talking in log cabins or campgrounds. What really is good is the flashbacks within the flashbacks that I mentioned. Pretty much the death scenes. The death scenes and the kill scenes are the best parts of the movie. This movie is a film which I can categorize as having, if you put it into a 20-minute best of compilation, you would have a fun time. If you watch it as an hour-and-a-half movie, you are going to be extremely bored. So I'm going to describe, in general, some of my favorite scenes from the movie that I recommend you either look up or at least skim through the movie to watch, or just to describe them in general. Now, I think my number one pick for best scene in the movie is this random scene where he's describing these two Girl Scouts walking home from, I guess, a Girl Scouts meeting. You could just say that they're random teenage girls, but they seem to have the Girl Scout hat and like sash on, so I'm assuming they're Girl Scouts. For some reason, they were carrying knives. I guess they were cooking. I don't know. We don't know anything about them other than that they were walking through the woods. And Bigfoot, apparently mad as hell at the fact that someone would walk through his woods, runs up to the two girls and grabs them and mushes them into each other with their knives. So while they're holding these knives outward, he's pushing them into each other so they stab each other. And somehow, during all of this, no one wants they think to drop the knives, or then once this Bigfoot gets stabbed in the collateral, and somehow doing this, he managed to perfectly cut their wrists and kill them. Another amazing scene that takes place right in the beginning of the movie is a scene where these, like, man and this woman are having sex in a car, and she clearly must have a wig on or something because it looks like it's falling off in the middle of the sex scene. But post-sex, Bigfoot just rips the doors open and fucking throws the guy over the roof of the car. We then see him on the front of the roof of the car as he makes the weirdest moans ever. It kind of sounds like something else is going on there at the top of the car. But yeah, the dude's literally making all kinds of noises as he's dying on the roof of the car, as his wife or partner or whatever is just staring at him as this fucking terrible synth music plays, and she just screams, but again, kind of in the same pitch as the music, and it goes on for like a minute or so. It's just so awkward and long. And of course, the most famous scene of the movie that is mostly remembered by the people that have seen it, and even the company that now has distributed this movie in 1080p on fucking Blu-ray has released patches that come with the Blu-ray, even a statue of Sasquatch recreating this scene, in which a guy gets off his motorbike, decides to take a leak in the woods as you would. So Bigfoot sees him peeing in his woods and decides he's had fuck enough of it and rips the dude's dick off and then pushes him back as the dude bleeds out to death and Bigfoot throws his dick. So, you know, I guess there's a lesson there. Don't go for a leak in the woods, and Bigfoot might rip your dick off. There's also another scene at the beginning of the movie where Bigfoot just grabs a guy in a sleeping bag and swings him around like fucking just a weightless bag and smacks him into a branch. I don't get it. They never really explain in the movie as well what Bigfoot's reason for killing everybody is. Well, to be fair, they do, but the explanation makes less sense than just being like, Bigfoot's a killing machine, I guess. They explain that Bigfoot is like the protector of the woods, is I guess some kind of Godzilla fashion of like, he just protects the woods from, you know, I guess people littering or trying to destroy nature, which obviously for the peeing scene and like maybe some of the other scenes I could get, but with the Girl Scouts, they were literally just walking through the woods. What did they do to deserve that? I don't know, man. And also, I regret if I didn't mention the main plot of this movie, which is sort of comes into play at the end, which is even weirder, which involves Sasquatch's baby, where the lady in this movie, who is the daughter of a weird fringe religious priest who believes that Sasquatch is a demon, decides to leave his daughter outside for hanging out with the dude once, and pretty much Sasquatch comes along and SAs her, and then she gets pregnant by Sasquatch. She then has a freaking baby Sasquatch human hybrid, which is literally just a baby doll covered in terrible fur, which the priest then kills and causes Sasquatch to go on a murder rampage on him. And now the end of the movie is Sasquatch looking for his dead baby and then deciding to just kill the rest of the goddamn researchers and the guy from the beginning of the movie, because I guess why not? In one of the most over-the-top scenes I've ever seen. Honestly, the last 10 minutes of this movie is probably the best part of the film, where Bigfoot just decides to walk into the cabin with the researchers and the woman that he originally had the baby with and just kills everybody and then just leaves. But even though he kills everybody and our main protagonist who's taking the movie back literally gets his face melted on a stove, he's somehow still alive to tell us the story back in the hospital. And after hearing the story, instead of going like, what the hell, or thinking that maybe the guy telling the story clearly had some kind of, I don't know, shock, and is, instead of thinking that someone killed his friends, thinks Sasquatch kills it, they declare that he did it all somehow, and that he's criminally insane, to give the movie a shock ending, I guess. So that was Night of the Demon. Honestly, I feel this movie mostly is remembered for its graphic nature. I feel like if this movie didn't have such graphic over-the-top death scenes with Sasquatch, most people would not remember the movie at all, because honestly the rest of it is pretty boring, which is actually quite funny, because when looking at research for this movie, it turns out the original cut of the film had pretty much no violence whatsoever and was pretty tame, but the producers decided to do a bunch of reshoots to add in gore because they thought, well, no one's going to watch the goddamn movie unless we put a bunch of gore into it, which they were right, to be honest. I mean, I can't imagine this movie being as fun of a watch if it didn't have the gore in it. But overall, I would not recommend this movie. It's not a great movie. It's really boring when Sasquatch isn't on scene. At times, almost dreadfully so, to the point where I was losing focus and honestly was starting thinking about doing other things and started doing other things while I was watching the movie. So overall, I'd say if you could watch like, I don't know, like a Dead Meat compilation or like a best of gore compilation of the movie, do that. Don't watch the movie though, it's not worth your time. And now I move on to the only movie in this video that I actually would recommend to you and give a thumbs up. Swamp Ape. Swamp Ape is a fun little film, honestly. That is probably the only one of these films that really has a heart to it. And also just overall, it's a pretty fun movie. So I found this movie while going through Amazon Prime back in the day when Amazon Prime used to have a lot low of a quality threshold. Their library literally used to just let you upload anything to it, and they didn't really have any qualms on content, which meant that you would find the best content on Amazon Prime. So one day while me and my wife were looking for a movie to watch on there, we saw Swamp Ape and decided that looks dumb, and we gave it a watch. And honestly, the title alone, I mean, it's called Swamp Ape. It sounds ridiculous. And just I'm pretty sure the poster was just a big picture of the Swamp Ape mask, which is something. So it just drew us in. And honestly, I did not regret watching it because it's a movie that I have watched about 3 times now. So the film itself starts with a crew of supposedly high school students going on a trip with their teacher on, I'm assuming, some kind of science trip. The teacher pretty much takes them all on this trip because he wants to find Swamp Ape, which is pretty much a real-life cryptid, also known as Skunk Ape or the Florida Bigfoot, who is pretty much Bigfoot, but what if he stank and lived in the swamp? Which may be mutually exclusive, not 100% sure. But pretty much, he's just Florida's version of Bigfoot, who there seems to be a lot more sightings of, and again, every time they report, he stinks. So, I guess you're going to make a movie about something, make it about something interesting. And I gotta admit, Swamp Ape is an intriguing spin-off of the Bigfoot mythos. So essentially, this teacher wants to find Swamp Ape and decides to take his students along on his journey to the swamp where they think he lives. And I guess their parents are okay with this. So he takes them away for the weekend. Oh, and the school too apparently is okay with this. The other weird elephant in the room that stumped us while watching this, that I mentioned before, is how old are these kids? Because it's kind of implied that they're like high school age with the way that he treats them and sort of the look of the school. But at the same time, he's sort of taking them on this trip away from their school, which is kind of a weird one. But also the actors look like they're in their 30s. Obviously, there's a common critique with pretty much all, media that has kids in it. And considering what they make the cast do, I'm glad that they clearly are in their 30s. But still, it's weird that this is a thing that's part of the movie. Our crew is composed your typical affair. We got the jock, the nicer jock, the nerd character, the blonde woman, the brunette woman, and sadly, this lady who is the fat comic relief. I wish she had more character, but pretty much her entire character is just the person to have fat jokes thrown at them. So the crew take a boat ride to the swamp, and the gang begins horsing around their cabins in one of the most homoerotic scenes I've ever seen, next to Top Gun. And then the crew go to a lake where the couple of them decide to just go skinny dipping, I guess, in this place they've never been to before, which is also a swamp. Again, I'm just thinking of that scene in Stand By Me with all the leeches. Meanwhile, again, as I said, the character, who is large, keeps bringing up food constantly to the point where it feels like the writers didn't know what else to make her do. They go on a hike, and the large character thinks she's lost her chocolate bar and her bag, so decides to go back by herself to grab it. And again, the teacher at no point decides to go with her, just lets her go off on her own. So she finds her chocolate bar, and as she goes to grab it, Swamp Ape shows up in all his glory and decides to caffeinate the poor character. The brunette character then goes to find her about 5 or 10 minutes after she's been decaffeinated, and we see the greatest headless effect I've ever seen, in which her head is just clearly badly chroma keyed out, but it's pretty amazing. The group then freaks out about the Swamp Ape killing one of them, and they all freak out at the cabin as the Swamp Ape draws closer. And pretty much then Swamp Ape one by one picks off the rest of the crew, till it pretty much comes down to the end where the teacher tries to use the blonde as bait for the Sasquatch, but this backfires because the Sasquatch just ends up killing him. The shock character then comes and saves the girl while defeating Swamp Ape in one of the greatest one-on-one fights I've ever seen in cinema. The two then ride out on a powerboat as royalty-free vaporwave, I swear I've heard in like some kind of album I've listened to before, plays off over the credits. Now, obviously, with this one, I didn't want to talk too much about the plot. I didn't want to spoil it because I feel like the plot itself is pretty simple, but I feel what this movie has is a lot of heart in its sort of goofy acting, and a lot of wild and just funny scenes. Like, the movie is clearly super low budget. Well, clearly, the people making it, they don't have a lot of resources, and they were probably making it just to have a fun time. And it kind of shows. Like, the ape costume for Swamp Ape clearly looks pretty terrible, and clearly was bought from some kind of costume shop or some online retailer for pretty cheap. But honestly, it kind of adds to it. Seeing this guy walk around in this, like, Party City-esque outfit as the rest of the cast seems terrified, while they also wear ill-fitting clothes to essentially what is a swamp. It really just adds to this goofy factor, and it gives off this very campy, fun vibe. And honestly, the hamming acting and the goofy dialogue that the characters spew throughout the movie really just gives off this like fun, interesting vibe. Again, this is one of those movies where you watch it with your friends and you're all just sort of having a fun time watching this goofy action and watching this over-the-topness. Like, have a couple beers, or, you know, if that's not your thing, just sit around with a couple of your friends or your partner and just enjoy this goofy movie. It stays entertaining enough to never get boring, and always stays, like, fun enough that the whole time you're kind of enjoying the silliness of essentially about a movie about a group of high school students getting attacked by Swamp Ape, the smelly Sasquatch. Overall, I'd recommend this movie, and it is actually on YouTube, I found. So you don't even have to go on Prime anymore. It's free on YouTube. I'd recommend going over there, watching the movie, maybe leaving some love in the comments, because I think it might be their official channel. So go for it. Why not? Have a fun time. And last but not least, I'd be amiss if I did not mention 1313 Bigfoot Island. This is another exciting, I put that in air quotes, installment in David de Kockhout's thrilling 1313 saga, which, if you don't know about, is this strange collection of films, which I can best describe as horror-themed softcore gay porn. I mean, and even then, horror theme is a pretty loose term. I mean, the way these movies are usually advertised, and they used to be all over Amazon Prime. I don't think you can watch a lot of them on English Prime anymore, but they used to all be on Prime. And it would pretty much be a poster with 5 like hot-looking dudes, shirtless, of course, and then in the background there would be the horror theme. So the first one I watched was Killer Bee Attack, in which I can best describe a movie in which most of the film runtime was naked dudes showering and rubbing themselves, and then a bee would turn up and kill them. And 1313 Bigfoot Island is no different. So the best way to describe this movie is just an absolute thrilling experience of watching a backpacker with no top just walk through the woods and occasionally answer phone calls, while occasionally taking the odd break to, of course, rub himself while Bigfoot noises are played over the audio. So I guess we're meant to assume Bigfoot's watching him. Again, a lot of the time the camera doesn't even change. Sometimes it does. But most of the time, it is just a guy rubbing himself with Bigfoot sound effects. So, I guess if that floats your boat. I mean, I don't know what kind of kink Bigfoot into dudes is, but hey, why not? I mean, I wish I was joking, but like, this is pretty much the whole movie. I mean, I didn't watch the whole thing. I skimmed through 40 minutes of the movie and it didn't change. I'm sorry, but I'm not watching 30 more minutes of a guy just rubbing himself or walking through the woods. I mean, I can do what you want, but what was the point? The movie clearly is just what it is. And honestly, I assume this series must some way be successful for the Cocktail because he made a lot of them. So, hey, if you want to see extremely softcore gay porn disguised as a Bigfoot horror movie, maybe watch this one. I don't know where to find it anymore because, again, I can't find any of these 1313 movies on Prime or any other streaming service. So maybe they're up in the Cocktail ether next to a talking cat and his greatest movie, Curse of Puppet Master. So overall, as you can see, the Bigfoot movie craze is an odd one. One that continues to exist and has existed for a while. And honestly, maybe I'll do another one of these videos talking about some good ones if I can find some ones that I particularly like a lot. But I just thought it was funny to mention some of the goofy, awful ones I've seen over the years. Again, Bigfoot's one of those things like goblins that I just find so hilarious as a concept that has pervaded our society, that people are so enthralled by the idea of just a big monkey man that I kind of have to look into, you know, the movie side of things. I'm a movie guy, and something about seeing someone to translate something that's so silly to film, especially horror movie, is always just interesting. And honestly, I have no ill will towards any of these movies. They all gave me at least some kind of fun and enjoyment enough that I wanted to make a video about them. They're good, you know, for what they are, I guess. Well, maybe not Willow Creek, but still. overall, it was fun looking back at these movies and just looking at Bigfoot movies as a whole. Maybe I'll do another one on some of the other odd cryptid movies. But overall, I would just want to say thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.